A job doesn't have to be something that sucks your creativity. It can actually be something that gives you even more. Here are 11 ways to be creative even when you're feeling stuck in a job. I'm Anita and welcome to this video. The following methods and tips I'm going to share are things that I've personally done in the last year in order to allow myself to create videos like this while I still work a job. It can take a lot of energy, time, and effort to put together the concepts and just, get my own soul ready to be back on video. But it is totally worth it because now I feel blessed with a job and I have the space and creativity to do the stuff that I love. So I know that a job doesn't have to be a hindrance. It can actually be something that you use to your advantage. Here we go. The first thing I invite you to do is to drop the attitude that you're stuck in a job. Even if you're working in a job right now that you never ever want to do again and you can't wait to leave, life has still brought you to the situation. There's definitely still something that you can learn from it or you wouldn't be here. So let's just make the most of it because no matter what, you're still in a place where you have an opportunity to learn and you're getting paid for it. My number one tip is to exercise. Get moving. Now, I know this is something you've probably heard before. It's standard knowledge that we have to exercise. And I was also exercising before I was able to reorganize my life in order to have space for creativity. However, the difference was that I started exercising in the morning and I started exercising more intentionally. And then on top of that, I read a book about how exercise actually creates a pharmacy in your brain. So our body naturally produces different chemicals and drugs where we are more alert, we think better, we learn better, we process everything better. And suddenly it made so much sense to me that I'm like, yes, this is why I need exercise. It's not just because I feel better and have a bit more energy. It's actually because it changes my entire brain chemistry so I can think differently. And that has been a game changer. I also changed exercising to doing it in the morning. Yes, this requires waking up early, but I have completely redone my morning routine. And one of these days, I'll make a video about what I do in the morning. Let me know in the comments below if it's something that you'd be interested in. But the fact is that it's just started with moving and moving in the morning. I also started listening to audiobooks on the drive. Now, I know it's quite common to listen to podcasts on a commute, and there's nothing wrong with that, but once I discovered audiobooks, I realized that they had so much more depth than a podcast. Because think of how much energy and effort and human intention goes into a book. An author has to put all these ideas together, and whether they write the book or they have someone help them, they really carefully organize all of the thoughts into something that is supposed to make sense to the human digesting it. Whereas podcasts tend to be more conversational, and while they're still great, I've just gotten so much more from audiobooks. Plus, I also discovered that listening to memoir style books works better for me than listening to the usual nonfiction how-to type books. And this is because memoir books have a storyline, and one of my favorite books that really inspired me this year was actually Thirst by Scott Harrison. And in the book, he's going to Africa, he's going all across America, he's having these crazy experiences. And I found that on my drives to and from work, I was so excited to get in the car. I've never been so happy to be stuck in a commute because I could listen to more of an audiobook. And the thing was, I was downloading this person's mindset. I was coming to understand and to frame my own life differently by being able to listen to these audiobooks. I found that listening to audiobooks just gave me so much more energy so that by the time I got to work or by the time I got home, I was so ready to change the world. Next, I finally signed up for classes. Now, there's two types of things. There's online courses and classes, and I'm also referring to in-person classes. Let's talk about the online ones first. I have been learning things online for a long time and creating online courses for a couple of years. It's something that I love. It's a great way to learn. And if you have never taken an online course, I highly recommend it. There's tons of free ones on the internet, and there are paid ones. There's something about just committing to a course and seeing it through and seeing how you feel at the end of it. I will totally agree with you if you want to say that, like, yeah, but Anita, after a long day of work, like, the last thing I want to do is try to stuff more information into me, and on the weekends all I want to do is rest. I get it, I've been there, but just try it. So one of the things I do is Monday evenings, I try to block off a little bit of time to learn and to digest a course. It doesn't always happen. My calendar is something I'm always tweaking and trying to improve, but the fact is that I make time in my week to learn. You can learn by reading, but I really find that courses have been helpful. Now let's talk about in-person courses. This also relates to my first tip about exercise. So I found that after a couple months of going to the same fitness classes, I was getting so bored. It felt like my brain was turning to mush, and I couldn't understand how other people do this. I felt like I wanted to use my brain when I exercise, and I felt like I was totally underperforming. And I thought of like how old I am, and if I kept doing that same fitness class for the next 5 years, I would literally the instructor would be teaching the exact same thing, more or less, for the next 5 years, and like, how much improvement would I actually get? Zero. In fact, I would probably even get worse because my brain and my soul wants to grow. I don't know which direction it is for you. It wants to grow, but if I don't do something different, instead of growing, I would actually be getting dumber. And I felt like when I was attending these fitness classes, I was kind of getting dumber. Like, the music wasn't uplifting. I wasn't connecting my brain to my body, which is what I really wanted. And I also really wanted to develop a skill. I'm like, I could become like a ninja martial artist in 5 years if I really wanted to, compared to just doing these mundane fitness classes. Once you get started, don't just waste your energy on doing the same thing. Actually pick up a skill that you want to learn, whether it is martial arts, dance, rock climbing, swimming, like, do it and then do it well. You will become so much smarter for it. My next tip for how to be creative when you're stuck in a job is to imagine that you are the CEO of yourself. Like, imagine that your name is a company and you are the CEO of your company. How would the CEO perform? If you actually get a chance to interact with the CEO of your company, you'll probably notice that this person interacts with people differently, they treat time differently, they are just different, right? So look at your own life. If you are the CEO now, you are no longer a victim, you are no longer just employee. There is like a world that you're trying to change with every day that you show up to life. What would you do differently? A big thing that this did for me was just like, look at my schedule. I'm like, if I was the CEO of my own company, like, I would not be so flimsy or wishy-washy with how I spent my time. Think of how you spend your mornings, your evenings, and your weekends. How do you think a CEO spends their time? This is actually something that I've been exploring a lot because I just wanted to know the answer, and because I just felt like I wanted to keep optimizing my life. How can I do better so that I can be more creative in my life? I've totally been in a process of reading books, digesting information, just trying to learn how people who are high performers, world-class athletes, how do people who seem to stand out in life and in the world live their mornings, their work days, their evenings, and their weekends. And I'll tell you, from everything I learned, they do it differently. So I have learned to do it differently, which is why I am filming these videos on a Saturday. Tip number 5 is to train for something, or imagine that you're training for something. This relates to the CEO tip, but it is different, because imagine that you were training to climb Kilimanjaro in 6 months. You could just try to do it, or you could actually train getting your endurance up, your fitness up, your cardio up, your strength up, so that you could go the long haul and that you could actually enjoy it. So I don't know if I'm gonna climb Kilimanjaro one day, I probably will, but I love adopting the attitude of like, I am training for something big. I am training for the day when I am CEO of a company. I am training for the day when, I am on a giant film set and there's 50 people involved and it's my job to show up and not be flimsy and wishy-washy. these ideas give me the right attitude towards my work, because it's not just like I'm just showing up, you know, to get this little results, get this paycheck so I can just, you know, get to the next weekend. No, I'm training for something so big, and maybe I won't see what it is, or it won't even come to fruition 5, maybe 10 years from now, but everything starts behind the scenes, right? We don't see how much an athlete trains day after day, how they wake up, how they eat, how they sleep before the Olympics. We only see them at the Olympics, right? But obviously we see the fruits of that. In your life, I know that you are destined for something big. You have the ability to change the world, or at least change your world, and it starts today. It starts from being like, okay, 5 years, at least 10 years from now, I'm going to be doing something incredible in the world. So what do I need to change about how I live now so that I can get there? That attitude is what made me listen to audiobooks. It's what made me join the classes and start exercising more, because I learned that people who are high performers in the world are constantly improving. So pick something, a big goal that scares you a little bit, something that would require you to change your life, and then start making the daily tweaks to change your life. It adds this momentum and this like flavor to your life that just makes it so much more exciting, and I have loved it. Tip number 6 is to watch a tutorial a day on YouTube. I did this to redecorate my room, and it was one of the best things I've done and such a big lesson for me. So I'm going to talk about space next, but first let's talk about the amazingness of YouTube tutorials that are all free. You don't even have to pay for a course. They're just sitting on the internet for us. So I knew that I wanted to redecorate my room, and I had this attitude that I don't know how, no one in my family knows how. I come from a family where we like always kept the same furniture. We tended to like, you know, we'd take furniture home if it was on the curb, pretty frugal, but it totally worked for our family. But I just got to a point where I realized I could not live in this room anymore with its mismatched furniture. Like nothing matched, things were just like, it was starting to bother me, because I was actually doing all of the other steps that I told you about, and I was starting to realize that like people who are high performers in the world typically do not live in messy spaces. And it's because the stuff just, it's like it takes your mental energy to process it, and it all happens subconsciously, but it totally affects you. So anyways, I needed to redecorate my room, had no idea how, and also believed at first that I didn't know how to do it. Turns out all I needed to do was start watching YouTube videos. So after several weeks of being like, I wish I could redo my room, I'm the kind of person that anytime I find myself thinking that like I want something changed, and if I don't do something about it, it bothers me. So I was like, okay, I keep complaining about this, I need to do something about it. So I was like, well, why don't I just try watching a YouTube tutorial? So I decided, why don't I just try watching a YouTube tutorial? What is the worst that could happen? On a Friday night after work, rather than watching stuff on Netflix, I just like looked up how to decorate a room on YouTube and started watching some tutorials. And I discovered that one, you can do it on a really simple budget, and you can make a really big difference with some good IKEA pieces, and it's a lot less complicated than it seems. And then I also discovered my own interior decorating style, and I was like, what? I ended up watching tutorials, several tutorials for about 3 weeks, and then I got to a point where I'm like, okay, I'm ready, I'm gonna go to IKEA and get stuff. And I redid my room, and now I live in a room that is very inspiring. I call it my creative studio, and I love it. What's the lesson here? It all started with a YouTube tutorial and the belief that I can do it. Like I can just try to learn, right? I didn't go to school for design, well, not interior design. And I come from a family where no one really has that interior design taste, but I still was able to make it happen. So what do you want to learn? Considering the tips from everything else I've mentioned in this video so far, you probably already have an idea of something that you'd want to learn. Even if it's not related to your job, that's totally fine. Because remember, when you expand one part of your brain, your genius, your skill set, it always trickles over into other things. Pick it and start watching one tutorial a day for it. And you'll notice that you will be able to pick the skill up so fast, and you'll amaze yourself. This is what I did when I decorated my room. I just like completely blew my own mind that I could do this. That belief that I could do this and like I can learn has totally spilled over into the other things that I want to do in life. The next thing to do is to redecorate your space or completely redo it. Maybe you're like me and you dream of one day having this beautiful, creative loft studio thing where everything is perfect, Pinterest worthy, and as soon as you walk in, it's like you're inspired to change the world. However, that is one day, and today we live in whatever space we have. And I reached a point in my life where I realized, what's the point in wishing for something in the future when I can try to make it right now? And as I mentioned with the YouTube tutorials, I figured out that it's actually not that hard. Just a few key pieces will completely change your space. Pinterest is your best friend here. Just go and look up inspiration for offices. I wanted my space to feel like my creative studio. Just a space where when I go in, whether I'm editing, writing, taking pictures, whatever it is that I am building at the moment, this is my studio, my like all-around studio to create it. So even just that practice of intentionally treating my space as my studio and then figuring out how to decorate it like that was so inspiring and energizing for me, because I went from a frumpy bedroom to having a creative studio. And really it's the same room, most of the furniture is the same. I just changed a few things here and there, and it made such a big difference, so that when I have that time booked where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna sit down and get work done, I'm like, this is my space to do it. The next tip then is to declutter your space. Once you've decided you wanted to redecorate it and you want to change it into an inspiring space, you'll probably realize that you have too much stuff in it. I, as a result of traveling, I'm already a minimalist and I don't need a lot of stuff to be happy, but I found that I would just keep stuff because that's kind of how I grew up. We always just kept things in case we needed it. However, I was pretty sick of having a closet where if I open a drawer, stuff is exploding out, or if I pull a sweater down, I was afraid everything else would fall down. That is just not working for me, because as you'll discover in this process, everything is connected. And so when we treat one aspect of our life with intention and we aim for excellence, then we naturally want to do other things in our lives well. So as you're preparing to decorate your space, you're going to want to declutter it. And I actually recommend giving yourself like 2 weeks, just instead of even trying to create anything, just clear, clean, and redecorate your space. You'll find that just fresh energy and fresh life in your room, which will make such a big difference. Tip number 9 is to book off space in a coffee shop to get work done. Just like you show up to a job and you will show up to a gym class or any class that you sign up for where there's peer pressure to get work done, you can book off space and time for yourself to work on your craft. Yes, this does take a little bit more discipline, but as you do all of these things, you're going to discover that your discipline muscle gets stronger and stronger. So here is a calculation that I had to make to convince myself that going to Starbucks was worth it. Now, maybe you have no problem spending $5 on a fancy cup of coffee. I did though, and I didn't want to spend a ton of money on drinks all the time. However, this is what I realized. If I actually calculate the number of hours that I'll spend in a coffee shop and the amount of work I get done, and if I multiplied that over a year, it was something like under 200 bucks. But I would get so much work done, and I realized, like, I am worth 200 bucks. My creativity, these videos, everything that I want to make in the world is worth investing 200 bucks of Starbucks drinks into. Obviously you don't have to spend $5 on a drink, but give yourself a reward, like just for showing up, maybe buy yourself a pastry or get yourself the green smoothie instead of the cheaper drink. And if you're not frugal or cheap at all, then you don't have this problem. Just book off time in a coffee shop to get work done. Tip number 10 is to dream up your ideal day. Now, if you've been feeling like you're stuck in a job, for a while and you're just not inspired at all, it is going to take some legwork to get to a point where you're like, this is the kind of life that I want. Because you've been in that sphere for a while of just like, you're not really thinking or inputting new ideas in. This is what I felt like in 2018 after working in a job for a year. I honestly didn't even have a vision for my life or what I wanted to create. I was just doing the job and coming home, doing a bit of exercise and resting. That was my life. However, I knew that I didn't want to live like that for the rest of my life, so I needed to start figuring out what I wanted. And to make that leap from living my life on autopilot to living my life super intentionally so that I can do things like this on a Saturday instead of just having a wishy-washy Saturday, that took time. And it took me giving myself a chance to figure out again, what is it that I want to do with my days? What is everything working towards? From experience, I also know that it is possible to turn your ideal day from a dream into a living reality. When I first started my business several years ago, I had a vision of how I wanted to spend my days. It involved creating, meeting people, and I had written down what time I'd wake up, what I'd eat, where I'd be, and I actually was able to create that life where I was living in the Mediterranean for a time and creating videos and working and collaborating with people and traveling the world all at the same time. And I loved it. However, I made a personal decision that I wanted to actually work in a job for a bit and just try something different. So then I created a different kind of life. And so I'm still in that process, constantly in that process of evolving and figuring out what is the next stage for me and what is the next thing that I want in life. My final tip is to be okay with hanging out with yourself. Being comfortable with being alone is so important. I probably should have made this tip number 1, but here goes. Now, I just want to say that this is not about being an introvert. This is about being self-aware and taking time for yourself to reflect on what lessons are you learning? What do you need to process? Where is there some hurt in your life that you haven't processed that's holding you back? A lot of how we move forward in life has to do with our emotional makeup and our psychology. And when we don't take time to actually reflect on our lives or even look forward into what it is that we want in the future for our lives, we're missing out on a lot of the depth of life. Creative, you're going to need to be okay with spending time with yourself. If you're someone who always goes out for drinks after work, or you tend to pack your weekends with activities, I recommend winding all of that down so that you can spend more time with yourself. Because the reality is, if you want to be creative while you're still working a job, you're going to need to do it by yourself for a time. I find that when I meet someone who's like, yes, they're creative, let's make something together one day. They're also working a job, and schedules are such a crazy thing to try to work out that it's so much better when I'm already creating and I let them get on their creative flow, and then over time our flows match up and we're able to create together. But it starts with me being okay with creating by myself first, knowing that people will kind of come along in their own timing. So that's it. Those are my 11 ways to become more creative even when you're stuck in a job. Once you start implementing some of these, you'll notice that you'll get momentum. It'll become easier and you'll have more energy, and then it all just adds up and you'll find that you'll be creative naturally without feeling overwhelmed or drained. So I'd love to hear from you. Which of these 11 things are you most interested in trying out? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this video helpful and you'd like to hear more things like this, or you just want to ask me some questions, let me know in the comments too. Be sure to follow me on Instagram, where I share my photography, writing, and behind the scenes of my creative journey. I'm Anita. That's it for this one, and I'll see you in the next one.